The Department of Agriculture said that the following: in order to produce 100 baskets of corn from 1 acre of land, the following is required: 400,000 gallons of water, 6,800 pounds of oxygen, 5,200 pounds of carbon, 160 pounds of nitrogen, 125 pounds of potassium, and 75 pounds of yellow sulfur. To all of this, there are many other elements, way too many to mention: the right amount of sunshine, and of course, in the end, the farmer's labor. When you add it all up, 5% of the produce can be attributed to human effort, and the rest is in God's hands. To me, that analogy is worth thinking about when we ponder our faith and our ultimate goals and purpose in life. Jesus had alienated a large group of followers because he spoke truth. We kind of are a little bit out of context in this gospel because last week we celebrated the Feast of the Assumption, and so it begins by saying that they found his words all too much for them, and we really don't know what words they're talking about. But had we celebrated the regular 20th Sunday of Ordinary Time, he was speaking about how his body was real flesh and wine was real blood, and he was talking about the Eucharist. And at this point, some people were having a struggle, taking that in a literal sense. And Jesus says to them, it's spirit that gives life, while the flesh is of no avail. Spirit and flesh is a critical thing that Jesus Christ talks about, that Paul will then go on and really kind of unpack for us. It seems to be the human want to be able to control and to have power. This is the ego, and all of that is what Jesus refers to as the flesh. The letting go, the giving up control, the surrendering to God takes a lifetime for most of us. Sometimes the older we get, the more we're able to let go more and more and more, and to recognize that the true wisdom comes from God. The people listening to Joshua in the first reading today figured out this thing that, well, where else can we go? Joshua says, me and my family, we decided to follow God and his laws. And he basically says to them, what are you going to do? And they, although they're not perfect, although they complain against God, although they mumble and grumble, they recognize in the end that God has freed them from the slavery to Egypt. And so they say, well, we need to follow the words of God, the words of truth. The apostles, when many people, as it says in the gospel, begin to go back to their former ways of life, they begin to abandon Jesus. And these words are too hard, as Jesus says. And because in giving up his body and his blood, this is not the Jewish ideal of a Messiah. This is not what they expect, and so they don't want to do it. And Peter, speaking on behalf of the other apostles, says, "To whom else shall we go? You have the words of everlasting life." The apostles are not perfect. Peter is not perfect. They're not going to always do it perfectly. They're not going to always just give up. As a matter of fact, when his life was on the line, Peter denied him, and Judas betrayed him, and all the others ran away. So it's not like just because they made that decision that they became perfect people. And so we're not perfect people. But in a sense, when we look around the world, where do we go for truth? And where do we go to seek out what will really benefit us, what will really help us to grow in peace and in love, to be the best version of ourselves? The farmer knows all too well that no matter how much effort he puts into it, in the end, it's in the hands of God. Everything can be ruined, everything can be taken away. Don't get me wrong, we have a role to play. We have things that we can do. We have ways to grow in spirit and love. But in the end, the most critical thing we can do is to surrender. To know that in the end, 95% of it is up to God. It doesn't mean that we have no worth. It's actually quite the opposite. We're made in God's image. We're made by God. And our humanity is valuable. Our personhood is valuable to God. We're uniquely loved by God, by name, in a very personal way. If we can let go of all of the ego, we will truly find the peace and the purpose that we all seek.